I teach it in my courses as well. And so, for example, I've just taught a story by Rabindranath Tagore. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt, sir. Let our Dr. Vindashni will officially introduce you to the
Sure.
audience, sir, so that we can start it officially. Yeah, please, sir.
Some formal way
Vindashni,
of introducing everyone, sir, so we should follow that. Yes. Good morning, esteemed guests, distinguished speakers, and literature passionate enthusiasts. It's an absolute pleasure to welcome you to day 2 of the International Literature Conference. After a dynamic and inspiring first day filled with insightful discussions, thought-provoking presentations, and engaging conversations, we are here thrilled to continue this literary journey together. Today promises an equally enriching experience with an incredible lineup of sessions, panels designed to deepen our understanding of literature's timeless power to connect, challenge, and inspire. Whether we are exploring diverse narratives, dwelling into the intersections of storytelling and culture, or celebrating the voices shaping contemporary literature, your active participation ensures the success of this shared exploration. As we gather from different corners of the world, let us embrace the unique perspectives and ideas that each of you bring to the table. This conference is not just an exchange of knowledge, but a celebration of a creative spirit that transcends borders and languages. Thank you for being part of this vibrant community of writers, scholars, and readers. Let us make today as memorable and impactful as yesterday. Welcome to day 2 of International Conference. Now I invite Mrs. C. Aarti, Assistant Professor of Psychology, to introduce the chief guest.
Thank you so much for providing me the opportunity, ma'am. Good morning, everyone. I am delighted to welcome Dr. Thomas J. Lin, who is an Associate Professor of English and Program Chair of Associate Degree in Multidisciplinary Studies at Penn State Berks, United States of America. He's also a member of Global Studies Degrees faculty. His teaching and scholarly interests include African, world, and ancient literature, as well as the music of the Beatles. In 2017, Dr. Thomas's book, Chinua Achebe and the Politics of Narration, Envisioning Language, was published by Palgrave Macmillan. His other writings on African literature have been published in many refereed journals and numerous books. Dr. Thomas was elected as a director in the Northeast Modern Language Association Board of Directors for a period of 3 years as British Global Anglophone Studies Director in the year 2020. He was awarded the Penn State University Comparative Literature Sidney Abol-Hosn Award in 2021 for making a decisive contribution to study of literature in global context. Dr. Thomas's book chapters have appeared in Routledge's 2 books, namely The Silences of War in Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's Half of a Yellow Sun under War and Contemporary Literature, and in Ed Maria Cristina Pividori Gurgo and David Owen's book, Women's Abandonment and Illness in African Literature in the year 2024. We are very delighted to have you among us, sir, and eager to hear you out. Over to you now, sir. Thank you.
Well, hello, everybody again. I don't know if you already heard me say everything that I said a little while ago, but let me get my no, that's not what should be up there. I don't know what you can see or not see. Oh, there you go. I must have sent you the wrong document, actually, because that's not what should be up there right now.
Oh, remove it. Actually, this is what I have received from you, sir.
Ah, my mistake. I am so sorry.
Yeah.
That's not
no
it.
No problem, sir. We have removed it.
I don't know how I made that mistake, but
That's okay, sir. We will start. We can continue.
Okay.
You want to send me, sir?
Yeah, I'll try one more time here to send it to you. I don't know how that
Yes, sir.
happened.
That's okay, sir.
Uh, um, all right. All right. I've just sent it again. I hope it goes through this time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Let me check, sir. Let me check. Just give me one.
There, I was a little bit confused about my program that it wasn't doing something quite right, but maybe it's gone through now.
I have, sir.
It it should say quotations at the top. I just emailed it.
Ma'am. Quotation away, அது அனுப்பிச்சிட்டேன். சரியா? Yes, sir. I have received and I have shared with my host. Within 2 minutes, she will display it.
Shall I start,
Yes,
or
sir. Yes, sir.
shall I wait till the quotation comes up?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sir, we have shared it, sir.
Oh, good. Is it the quotations?
Yes, sir. It's quotation.
Excellent. Okay. So again, good morning, everybody. It's nighttime here in Pennsylvania, in the northeastern United States. And if you didn't already hear me say that, I'm so glad to be able to join you all the way on our separate continents, but with a shared passion for learning and literature. And yeah, so I'll get going with it. Let me just say that I I do refer to several different African writers in this paper, but in this presentation, but the main focus is on three different novels, as you will see. But I also bring in some other African writers that some of you may have studied before, um, including Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie and Ama-Ata Aidoo. Those are really famous West African authors, and maybe some of you have already studied them. Anyhow, I'll get going. The title of my presentation is Women of the African Novel: The Struggle for Personal Fulfillment. Okay, this reflection on the struggle of female characters in three novels by African authors may or may not be regarded as an example of feminist criticism. Certainly, it has a feminist orientation if feminism entails an examination of women's experiences and the societal forces that tend to thwart women's aspirations. Somehow, though, in the popular imagination, the concept of feminist criticism carries connotations of indoctrination. Yet, in focusing on women's lives in three African novels, I do not resort to distortions or propaganda to shed light on women's struggles, for my words refract what these African authors portray, and my view is that their writing is not predicated on misrepresentation or indoctrination, but rather on African women's realities that these authors know so well. In the words of, and this is the first quotation, there's about 6 or 7 quotations in this that I've put on that document. This is the first one, A. In the words of Onyemaechi Udumukwu, feminism is animated by desire to reconstruct history in order to reconstitute the woman as subject. This implies that the woman is presented or represented not as a mere object of history, put at the margin. So my presentation does indeed attempt to demarginalize women, but such an approach does not distort the living reality. Rather, it reorients our perspective to allow us to see what is, after all, right in front of our faces. The three novels on which this discussion focuses are No Longer at Ease from 1960 by Chinua Achebe. And again, that might be an author that some of you have studied because one of his novels is world famous and studied to the present day. It's called Things Fall Apart. I'm guessing some of you in the audience have read that one. But the one that I'm focusing on here is the sequel to that. A lot of people don't realize there is a sequel to it, and it's called No Longer at Ease, and it was published in 1960. So that's by Chinua Achebe. The second novel I'll discuss in this paper is called Stay With Me by another Nigerian author. It's from 2017. Her name is Ayobami Adebayo. She's derives from the Yoruba people of Nigeria, where Achebe is from the Igbo people of Nigeria. And the final novel examined in this paper is called Behold the Dreamers from 2016 by a female writer from Cameroon who, last I checked, lives in the United States, as Achebe did for a long time. And her name is Imbolo Mbue of the Bakweri people of, at least I assume she is of the Bakweri people because that's who she writes about in this novel. The Bakweri people of Cameroon. Female characters in all three of these works use their intelligence, strength, and courage to begin to embrace the lives they seek, lives that will give them some measure of personal fulfillment. In all three cases, though, these characters must grapple with tensions between traditional and modern norms that repeatedly threaten to undermine these women's aspirations. The tensions between tradition and modernity challenge people around the world in complex ways, but as these novels suggest, women's roles and prerogatives encompass one of the most hotly contested sites in this struggle, and women often pay a higher price than the men in their lives. It would appear that patriarchal structures are defined and constructed according to the extent to which the female status is subordinated to that of the male. Men are loath to lose their customary habitual privileges in this area, partly because they constitute valuable advantages and partly because their very masculinity is defined by them. Now, before I go any further, I just want to make sure, um, is everything going well? Can everybody hear me and understand what I'm saying?
Yes, sir.
Oh, excellent. Good.
Yeah, pretty much, sir. Thank you.
All right, I'll continue. Chinua Achebe's, I beg your pardon. I misspoke about the Achebe novel. It's called, I misspoke. I'm sorry. It's called A Man of the People, and it's from 1966. And it depicts a wider range of dynamic female characters than any other fictional narrative by Achebe. Indeed, the variety and vitality of the women portrayed make the female presence as central to the Nigerian-born author's purposes as that of the male characters, although the male characters represent the novel's protagonists. A Man of the People suggests that its unnamed African nation, a version of post-independence Nigeria, will not fulfill its potential without fundamental socio-political changes, including a tangible evolution in women's selfhood and leadership roles. The opposition between women's aspirations and the daunting familial and communal limitations imposed on them mirrors the independence era struggles that unfold in Achebe's tale. A Man of the People's leading female characters emerged from the margins precisely because the text humanizes their personal predicaments and validates their choices. Their sympathetic collective voice rivals in significance the insistently egocentric voice of their male counterparts. So even though uh, they're not the protagonists of the novel, I believe that Achebe shows women's lives and strength and intelligence extremely well. Um, One of the female characters in The Man of the People is the very young Edna Odo. When she's first introduced in the novel, I would be surprised if she was more than 12 or 13 years old. The title character, Chief Nanga, who is a cabinet minister in a fledgling post-independence African democracy, is grooming Edna to be his second wife, that is his, quote, parlor wife, unquote, while keeping Margaret as his first wife. According to the protagonist and narrator, Odile Samalu's friend and fellow teacher, Andrew, Chief Naga considers Margaret to be, quote, too bush, unquote, for the kinds of social occasions that a government minister attends. But the likely rationalization embedded in Nanga's view is implied in its intrinsic paradox. Some of the very people who would see Margaret as, quote, too bush, unquote, would tend to look askance as well at Nanga's taking a second, much younger wife, that is, practicing polygamy. As Andrew, who is from Nanga's home village, remarks concerning Edna and Chief Nanga, Andrew says, I feel sorry for her. That man has no conscience. Andrew is a friend of the narrator and protagonist, Odile Samalu, who is a teacher at Chief Nanga's former grammar school and his current protege. And I want to mention that it's a little bit hard to say that Odile, whom I'm going to refer to several times, is the protagonist. He is the narrator, but in some ways, Chief Nanga is also the protagonist. And by the way, he's the one who's referred to in the title, A Man of the People. It is through Chief Nanga that Odile meets Margaret Nanga, his first wife, and through Margaret, Odile is able to meet Edna Odo, who Chief Nanga is grooming to be his second wife. Odile witnesses Margaret's suffering, and as she anticipates sharing Chief Nanga with Edna. Nevertheless, Margaret expresses empathy for Edna, as well as her resolve to accept Edna into her home, and in so doing reveals that when she was around Edna's age, she had educational aspirations that were thwarted by the pressure to marry Chief Nanga. And this is the second quote. This is quote B. I wasn't old enough to refuse. Edna is falling into the same trap. Imagine a girl straight from college not being allowed to teach even for 1 year and look around. Anyway, what is my share in it? Let her come quick to enjoy Chief Naga's money before it runs away. She laughed bitterly. I won't spoil anybody's good fortune. As soon as Edna's mother recovers, let Edna come and eat Nanga's wealth. That is, her husband's wealth. Let nobody remember the woman who toiled and starved when there was no money. She rubbed her eyes with a corner of her lapa and blew her nose into it. So my focus isn't on Margaret, it's on Edna, but you can see that a young woman has very little choice, and has a very difficult time realizing her own potential. Chief Nanga's use of marriage to make a young woman a prop for his social appearances, among other things, and his expectation that his first wife will adapt to sharing her home are expressive of the imbalances a man of the people ties to polygamy and of Chief Nanga's drive to possess women. Prior to these events, it seems certain that Edna will marry Nanga, but this is circumvented by, among other factors, Edna's maturation. She becomes more comfortable in the assertion of what she wants for herself. Perhaps, as Odili reflects, she had simply grown a little more since October. Whatever the reason, she was now a beautiful young woman and not a girl looking as though she was waiting to be taken back to her convent. Edna, in short, has come to, and now I'm quoting, to own herself a little more, a term that Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie connects to her novel Americana's female protagonist Ifemelu. You may have read that novel too. It's a very famous novel here in the States, maybe one of the most famous African novels, and besides Things Fall Apart, at least in the United States. The phrase that Ifemelu's mother uses is to own herself a little more. She has decided during this period uh, to act according to a principle that in Adichie's Half of the Yellow Sun, the aunt of the protagonist, Alana, lays down to her niece. You must never behave as if your life belongs to a man. Your life belongs to you and you alone. Sosu gi. Not sure what that means, but I believe it's an Igbo phrase. Adichie's own thematics of possession in respect to women is likely not a gesture of homage to a literary mentor, that is to Achebe, but rather a sign that any gains women have made in modern Nigeria are precarious and that the male urge to control remains vital, including among those with extensive formal education. A passage in Adichie's Purple Hibiscus, again, a very famous African novel around the world, spoken by Ifeoma, a university lecturer, and the narrator Kambali's aunt, reveals that one of Chief Nanga's methods for taking possession of Edna from her father, that is in Achebe's novel, that is paying her school fees, only became more elaborate in later years. Now I'm quoting, this is quotation C from Purple Hibiscus, which is a much more recent novel from 2003. This is what the college lecturer Ifeoma says, quote, 6 girls in my first year seminar class are married. Their husbands visit in Mercedes and Lexus cars every weekend. Their husbands buy them stereos and textbooks and refrigerators. And when they graduate, the husbands own them and their degree. In the Nanga-dominated environment that Edna and Margaret inhabit, substantial time to grow as an individual, to obtain a fuller education, and thereby to own oneself more fully is precisely what a woman is denied. Achebe suggests that early marriage, in which the young woman has little, if any, discretion, including to pursue her education, is detrimental to the fulfillment of her potential in ways meaningful to her. Achebe's story implies that Edna, before definitively expressing her interest in Odili, has needed to internalize that her pending marriage to Chief Nanga does not augur well for her. In her situation as the daughter of poor villagers, the realization has not been easy. Making matters more difficult, Nanga is used to getting what he wants in various spheres. He is among those who comprise the group of independence era leaders who inhabit the neo-colonial space that theorist Frantz Fanon describes in The Wretched of the Earth. People like Nanga are individuals who selfishly pursue their own advantage rather than that of their nation. Fanon remarks, and I didn't put this in the quote, but I'm quoting now, quote, the national middle class disappears with its soul set at peace into the shocking ways, shocking because anti-national, of a traditional bourgeoisie. Chief Nanga has used his governmental position and mutually beneficial relations with foreign companies to enrich himself and to build in his home village a new 4-floor home next to the one he already has there. And he has a mansion in the capital city of, which in the novel is called Bori. Odili describes Nanga's other residence, the one in Bori, the one in the capital, as a, quote, princely 7-bathroom mansion, unquote. As with homes, so with women. According to Odili, Nanga is, quote, a man who had so many women ready to make themselves available, unquote, and has, quote, 5 stories, that is, a female conquest, has 5 stories to every one of mine, unquote. In gaining independence, then, from the philandering government minister who has paid her bride price, education, and other incidentals, Edna Odo decolonizes herself. She transitions from viewing the married chief Nanga as her future husband, a circumstance chosen for her, to viewing the single Odali that way, a circumstance she chooses for herself. In doing so, Edna asserts that she, not her father, not her other family members, not her social circle, and implicitly not even her new fiance, that is Odali, has the right to control her life. This transition signifies one woman's passage from subalternity to independent agency. Gayatri Spivak contends, and here's the quotation called D, if, in the context of colonial production, the subaltern has no history and cannot speak, the subaltern as female is even more deeply in shadow. Spivak's remark indirectly suggests why Edna's rejection of Chief Nanga is especially resonant. Edna insists that it is her right not to exist in the shadow of Chief Nanga in the years ahead. Her subordination let me start that again. Her subordination to and her later liberation from Nanga heightened our identification with the women and men of the new nation as a grasping male power elite threatens to ruin it. Even so, Edna's defiant self-empowerment may be traced to generations of women whose personal strength Achebe attests in his portrayal of traditional village characters in the same novel, and in other novels that he writes, like Mama Ikwefi, Hannah Okonkwo. None of these are protagonists, but they are strong, intelligent women. Now, I have to look at the time, and I see time is slipping away, so I'm going to move on to my next novel. It's called, and please interrupt me if I'm not being clear or if something is wrong with the signal or anything. In Nigerian author Ayobami Adebayo's first novel, which is called Stay With Me, from 2017, a woman of mixed Yoruba and Fulani ancestry, whose name is Yejide Ajayi. Is everything okay?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You can continue, sir.
Sir, everything is fine, sir. You can continue. So you are in mute, actually. Yes, sir. Fine.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. All right. Sorry. In Nigerian author Ayobami Adebayo's first novel, Stay With Me, a woman of mixed Yoruba and Fulani ancestry, Yejide Ajayi, nurtures for over a year the conviction that she is pregnant. She experiences many of the physical manifestations of pregnancy, and she both resists and is shamed by the perception of her husband, Akin, that she is mentally ill. Akin says to her, you know you sound crazy, right? The text leaves no doubt that Yejide does indeed experience pseudocyesis, or the false belief that one is pregnant. But as her story unfolds, Yujide's malady appears to be an almost natural compensatory response to her society's elevation of women who give birth and stigmatization of those who do not. In fact, her illness begs the question as to whether the entity that is more insane than Yejide is her brutally normative society. She is pitied and harassed for being barren, yet later we find that she has been fertile all along, giving birth, in fact, to 3 children fathered by Akin's younger brother, Dotun. What's more, Akin turns out to be the cause of the couple's childlessness. As the narrator later reveals, he is sexually impotent. And in the interest of time and not going over, I'm going to go a little further into this discussion of stay with me. While pseudocyesis holds sway over Yejide, she gets a puffy face, her belly protrudes, she loses her period for many months, and she can, quote, even feel the baby kick, unquote. One doctor whom the couple consult, who knows from a scan that Yejide is not pregnant, observes, these things happen sometimes. Women think they are pregnant, but they are not. Medical confirmation that Yejide is not pregnant does not persuade her, and it takes over a year for her to surrender her imagined pregnancy. And she says at that point, quote, I lost my miracle baby in a flood of guilty tears, unquote. Arguably, Ejide's faith in this false pregnancy is induced by a host of patriarchal expectations, yet paradoxically, her embrace of it amounts to her first rebellion against the madness of patriarchal expectations that she cannot meet. Partly what I meant by that is that she's expected to get pregnant even though her husband is impotent. But he doesn't get blamed for the problem, she does. She refuses in this case to submit to assumptions about what a woman's body should do, and although biology necessarily wins over her belief in the pseudo-pregnancy facilitated by Prophet Josiah, she raises important questions about the true locus of craziness in her life. What should not be ignored concerning Akin's, that is her husband's, maneuvers, as selfish and destructive as they are in many respects, is that his emotional investment in Yejide, his wish that her need to bear a child be fulfilled and that she regain full psychological health, and his drive to build a family with her, endure. The same may be said of Yejide's emotional commitment to Akin. Until a combination of agonizing events drives her away, she is committed to him for a long time until an unbearable series of circumstances. So for a number of years, they are not happy with each other, but their early bond does prove resilient. Considering all that transpires, Akin's devotion to that bond, self-serving in many respects as it is, arguably is on a par with Yejide's. In one of his narrative interludes, he observes, Yejide is the main narrator, but occasionally he narrates. And he says at one point, I loved Yejide from the very first moment. No doubt about that. But there are things even love can't do. But even when love is in 1,000 pieces around your feet, that doesn't mean that it's no longer love. That's Yejide's thinking. What ultimately causes Yejide's commitment to her marriage to go off the rails is Akin's deliberate and furtive interference in her sexual life and the dreadful illnesses suffered by the 3 children she bears. They all have sickle cell disease, and 2 of them die, and Yejide believes that the 3rd one will imminently die too. Although certain Although outward cultural appearances may change over time, certain primal norms of conduct along gender lines remain. Yejide's mental illness mirrors the mental illness of a society. At the core of the mental illness is that women are valuable for their fertility and not for who they are as people and personalities. That society has ingrained in Yejide the notion that a woman is of little or no value without a connection through birth. Nevertheless, in her determination to survive and to have a meaningful life, Yejide abandons her marriage and, unbeknownst to her, her daughter Rotimi, the meaning of which in English is "stay with me," hence the title of our novel, of whom her brother-in-law Dotun is the father, and who Akin raises as his daughter, even though Akin realizes that biologically Rotimi is not his daughter, that she is the daughter of his brother by his own interventions. After years apart, during which time Yejide runs her own business, a hair salon, Yejide, Akin, and Rotimi are reunited. They may have a future, the novel doesn't really tell us for sure, but if so, it will be partly due to Yejide's strength in saving herself and building her own life. And now I've come to the third novel, and that is Imbolo Mbue's 2016 novel, Behold the Dreamers. And that title gestures in part to the idea of the American dream. The central couple, Neni and Jende Jonga, who are from the town of Limbe in Cameroon, also in West Africa, have from a long time before their departure from that African nation nurtured an idealistic view of emigrating to the United States. So sure are they that life in the States holds for them a better existence than what they have reason to expect in Cameroon, that they strive, sacrifice, and take consequential risks to emigrate to the United States, specifically to New York City, and to build a life there for themselves and their children. As dreams often do, the American dream of the Jongas, who are of the Bakweri people of Cameroon, has a quasi-spiritual dimension. Their endeavor to fulfill that dream borders on a spiritual quest. They are on a journey to actualize their potential and to validate their very existences. Nevertheless, by the end of the novel, Jende has adopted a new dream for himself and therefore his family back in Cameroon. Nene, who has little choice but to accede to Jende's resolve to return there, does indeed see what becomes of her dream, a crushed and lifeless entity that leaves her at novel's end, a frightened, depressed, and silenced version of her formerly vibrant, shrewd, and resourceful self. And I should mention that they have two children. One is a boy who was born in Cameroon but educated in the United States. He's about 10 years old at this point, and a daughter who was born in the United States and is quite a few years younger than the boy. Jende does not abandon Nene, but practically forces her to abandon both the land that she has embraced and the self-actualization there in the United States that she was in the process of attaining. Nene reveals a kind of soul sickness by the end of Behold the Dreamers that partly draws on the dissolution of the marital happiness that she once had shared with Jende. In their early years in New York, Nene and Jende are happily married, and optimistic about their American prospects. Jende becomes a chauffeur to a wealthy business executive whose name is Clark Edwards, and Nene works as a home health aide. Further, for the first time in 16 years, Nene is in school. She successfully studies chemistry at Borough of Manhattan Community College, pursuing her professional ambition to become a pharmacist. Like Jende, she eventually begins to work for the Edwards family, in her case as a maid and a babysitter for their younger son. During this time, Nene becomes pregnant with the second child, and for the first time we see an imbalance of authority, at least from a modern perspective. The couple fight because, and here is quotation E, Jende decides that he wants her, Nenny, to stay at home while Nenny wishes to continue in school during the pregnancy. Jende explains, I think it's going to be best for you and the baby. Despite Nenny's intense opposition, she capitulates. She says, I can't believe you're doing this to me, she cried. Why are you always acting as if you own me? He made decisions for their family. Sometimes he conferred with her about his decisions. Most times he did what he deemed best. Always, she had no choice but to obey. In essential ways, Nenny is a self-possessed woman, but Jende still believes in his practical possession of her, while Nenny does not have the cultural leverage to resist this assumption. These are determining factors in Nenny's withdrawal from the college that she attends. As the Jonga marriage deteriorates, and as Jende's status in the immigration system grows more precarious, the immigration system in the United States, it becomes clearer that Jende is determined to return the family to Cameroon. And Nenny doesn't want to go. She repeatedly visits a progressive church in Greenwich Village in the city. The spiritual nourishment that she gains from these visits, including from her conversations with the female pastor, Natasha, reinforces the sense that Nene's vision of a life with her family in the United States is tied up with her spiritual life. And indeed, the termination of Nene's American dream seems to shatter her spirit, leaving her at the end of the novel a silent, passive observer of the family's return to Africa. In this way, the Jonga family, as westernized as they appear through much of the novel, are subject to their birth culture's outlook on gender and male prerogative. Nani, who must abandon her own need for personal fulfillment, is reduced to worrying about the other women with whom she will have to compete for Jende, and seems a shadow of her former self, suffering a soul sickness that she may not actively remedy. Thus, Behold the Dreamers portrays a marital bargain that gives Jende, with his physical force and privileged position, a path to a new dream in the old country, while while requiring Nanny to abandon her dream of fulfillment in a new one. And now I'm going to end. This is pretty much the final paragraph with two quotations, which I'll connect to in a moment. The future success of modern societies around the world depends on honoring the aspirations and independent agency of women. These three novels' portrayal of women inescapably reflects on a nation's political welfare. Ghanaian author Ama Ata Aidoo, a famous West African novelist, the first really famous one from West Africa, enlarges this connection, maintaining that the status of women is directly related to prospects for modern Africa to come into its own. And here's the quotation from Ama Ata Aidoo. It's F. When people ask me rather bluntly every now and then whether I am a feminist, I not only answer yes, but I go on to insist that every woman and every man should be a feminist, especially if they believe that Africans should take charge of our land, its wealth, our lives, and the burden of our own development. Because it is not possible to advocate independence for our continent without also believing that African women must have the best that that environment offers. And now coming is the final quotation, which is Mark G. In other words, as Tuzaline Jita Allen puts it, quote, I do believe that post-independence Africa cannot afford to ignore women if it wants to succeed in nation rebuilding, unquote. In contemplating the fate of the African nation, these not that is, nations on the African continent, of course, these novels expose attitudes and conventions that thwart the potential of women's well-being, along with their capacity to help the nation to succeed, to raise the lot of women and men alike. The novel suggests that the nation and its communities will be positioned to flourish when a woman is able, indeed enabled, to pursue the forms of personal fulfillment that are meaningful to herself. Thank you very much. That is it.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for your wonderful session. We got a lot of inputs, and really it was so inspiring to learn in depth with literature. Thank you very much, sir.
I appreciate you hosting me, and if there are any questions, I would be glad to entertain any that, if time allows. I don't know if you have enough time.
Any questions from the audience side?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Sorry to interrupt. So there is a question in the chat box. Shall I read it out?
Yes, please, because
Your
I can't see it.
This is the question. Your discussion presents a compelling portrayal of women's struggles with societal and patriarchal constraints in African novels. Considering the themes of agency and subjugation, how do these literary narratives address or reflect the evolving roles of women in contemporary African societies, particularly in terms of education and economic independence?
I think that's a great question, and I've wondered
That's a
that
very
myself. Go ahead. It's, I think that's a very good question, and I've wondered the same thing myself, and I've asked people when I meet them and when I'm in Africa. I've been to Africa a few times, and it's a mixed picture. There are women who are doing amazing things and excelling in all the professions, and contributing in wonderful ways to their societies. But in other ways, women are held back and are not able to um, access even the education they need to get ahead. Part of it is education, because the public education system in some countries um, is very weakened and underfunded, and without it, it's hard for women to, unless they go to the private schools, to get ahead. But I do feel overall, from what I've heard and what I've read, that women, that in some ways, for some women, it's moving in the right direction.
Thank you, sir. Sir, we also have another question in the chat box.
Thank you.
Shall I read? Your
Yes, please.
analysis highlights how African novels depict women's struggles with patriarchal structures, often leaving them with limited agency. How do you see contemporary African authors reimagining or challenging these traditional narratives to present more empowered visions of personal fulfillment for women?
You know, that's one of the great things about modern African novels. They really explore um, the realities of what women are up against. And I don't think I need to tell you that many African novels are being published that are of jaw-dropping excellence. Not, yeah, not by anybody's standards. And they are very much oriented toward making it clear how women have been disenfranchised and exploited, but also what it takes for women to fulfill their potential, and that when they do fulfill their potential, they're every bit as formidable as men are.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
I hope we'll end the session here.
Okay.
Uh,
It's
Thank
been
you,
my
sir.
honor to it's been my honor to speak with you tonight, or in your morning.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. So it's a privilege to have you here for a wonderful session, and we hope we connect for the next time too.
Thank you very much for having me, and best of luck with the rest of your conference. And I hope we can meet up again in the future.
Thank you. Sure, sir. Sure. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye. Dear participants, let's break here for 15 minutes and we'll come back at 10:55. Ma'am.
மேம் ரெடியா இருங்க. கௌஷலி வந்துட்டாங்க. நீங்க
Hi everyone, can you all hear me?
Hi, ma'am.
Hello.
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure. If it's okay, I will share my screen. I have a small PowerPoint.
Sure,
but
definitely, ma'am.
okay, thank you. Yeah, hang on. I'm just trying to figure out how to share this. Hi everyone.
Can we start
Good.
the session, ma'am?
Yes, absolutely.
Before that, we have a small introduction, ma'am. Let's begin
Sure.
with that. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Once again, after a small break. Now, I am very happy to invite Dr. Rexmart, Assistant Professor, Department of EFL, to introduce our chief guest.
It is with great pleasure that we introduce Dr. Paushali Baturi, Assistant Professor of Children's Literature in the Department of English at Middle Tennessee State University. Dr. Baturi's distinguished academic career is marked by her profound contribution to the field of children's literature, post-colonial studies, media studies, book history, and digital humanities. Dr. Baduri's current book project, The Home and the World in Post-Colonial Print Culture, the Sagatya Kutir and Bengali Children's Publishing, delves into the intricate interplay between nationalism and global consciousness in Indian children's publishing. Her meticulous research focuses on the Kolkata publishing house, the Sagatya Kutir, examining its literary output during a transformative period from the 1940s to the 1970s. Her expertise and dedication have been recognized through numerous awards and fellowships, including the prestigious CLI or Mellon Fellowship for Dissertation Research in Original Source. Dr. Baturi's scholarly contribution include a wealth of peer-reviewed publications with articles featured in Children's Literature Association Quarterly, South Asian Review, and the Lion and the Unicorn. Notably, her deep engagement with Ella Montgomery's works, which she grew up reading in India, has led to the publication of 2 peer-reviewed articles on Annie of Green Gables and a presentation on Annie's House of Dreams at the LMMR Institute's Biennial Conference in Prince Edward Island. We are honored to welcome Dr. Paushali Baturi, whose extensive research and academic pursuit continue to illuminate the fields of children's literature and post-colonial studies. Her insights and contribution have significantly enriched our understanding of these disciplines, and we look forward to her valuable input and engagement in today's discussion. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much for such a kind introduction. I hope you guys can all hear me okay. If you don't, please let me know. Okay, I'm just going to go straight into it. So thank you everyone and for welcoming me to this great conference. My talk today is entitled New Horizons in Queer Desi Young Adult Literature. So my talk will provide an overview of the nascent genre of queer Desi young adult or YA literature and media from both South Asia as well as the diaspora. I'll start off by contextualizing queer adolescent literature with respect to the continuing anti-LGBTQ legal climate in South Asian countries. And then I will place some diasporic texts within a larger trajectory of queer YA publishing in the West. Apart from the broader overview of queer Desi YA literature publications, I will also discuss a recent example, or two recent examples rather, of the often punitive representations of LGBT identities and taboo or forbidden desire that many of these queer Desi young adult novels portray, as well as others that have fortunately moved away from this fairly tired trope. I should mention at the start that this talk is part of like a longer series of projects centering queer Desi violet. I look forward to exploring the area further, and I'd love to hear any feedback or suggestions from the audience today that I may take into account in future research. And a small note on terminology before we begin. So I use the term South Asian and Desi interchangeably. So as you know, Desi is a self-referential term used by South Asian communities that derives from the word Desh or country. Vijay Harpalani opines that the term Desi references a collective identity, intending to unite a worldwide South Asian diaspora. So this includes individuals who can trace their origins to Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Pakistan, the Maldives, Nepal, and Sri Lanka, as well as their significant diasporas throughout the world, including the Caribbean and East Africa. So to cite just one instance, there are more than 5.4 million Americans of South Asian origin in the United States alone. So of course, it comes as no surprise that there are considerable differences in nationalities, ethnicities, religions, languages, and immigration experiences that complicate effective solidarities between Desi communities globally. However, queer spaces have always been sites of new possibilities and imaginings. As Shweta Majumdar Adur argues, South Asian LGBTQ mobilizations have attempted to resist historic differences through intentional organizing across lines of regional, religious, and class differences. So now bringing the conversation back to the topic of young adult literature representing LGBT Desi characters. Do we even have any queer books for Desi teens? And if yes, where may we find some today? I'm hoping that after listening to my talk today, you guys, if you are interested in this, will have some more avenues to explore and recent publications maybe to follow up on. So to answer this, where may we find queer books for Desi teens now in 2024? I will be focusing on select YA works by authors from South Asian countries, as well as from global Desi diasporas. Now, although there may be significant cultural overlaps, it is crucial to distinguish between the diasporic texts, that is ones that are originating from South Asian origin authors in the West, and the texts that are originating from South Asia itself. So while texts featuring or aimed for queer Desi youth are quite rare, both in South Asian countries as well as in the diaspora, the reasons why they are rare in both these different spaces vary in key respects. So in case of South Asian countries, so South Asian nation states, the 8 countries that I just mentioned, the ongoing legacy of legalized homophobia is primarily to blame. While not the only reason, the criminalization of LGBT individuals, along with widespread homophobia as a key common feature across the South Asian nation states, goes a long way towards explaining the lack of youth literature featuring sexual minorities originating from South Asia. If you would take a look at this slide, I'm just going to do a very brief rundown of the state of LGBTQ rights in South Asia as of this year. There are currently only 3 South Asian countries where same-sex sexual activity has been decriminalized. So that's India, Bhutan, and Nepal. Nepal is the most progressive, with a single judge bench issuing an interim order in 2023 to temporarily register the marriages of non-traditional couples and sexual minorities. However, the Supreme Court in Nepal has not yet delivered a final verdict regarding same-sex marriages, and these do not enjoy full legal rights and representations afforded to opposite-sex marriages. In India, as we know, the infamous Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code, or IPC 377, which was a legal relic of the British Raj, criminalized, and this is the quote, carnal intercourse against the order of nature. And it was only struck down by the Supreme Court as recently as 2018, after decades of rocky bans and litigations. Section 370, IPC Section 377 had been widely used as an anti-LGBTQ tool to suppress the rights of sexual minorities in India. Despite the repeal, LGBT folks in India are still second-class citizens in terms of several key legal rights, such as same-sex marriage, civil unions, and trans rights, and continue to be the target of abuse by both the state and society in general. India is not alone in such state-sanctioned bigotry. This Victorian anti-sodomy law also continues to cast its long shadow over Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, which use versions of Section 377 to effectively criminalize homosexuality. So these are all the countries within South Asia where homosexuality is still a criminal offense, with penalties ranging from less severe to extremely severe. An example is Article 365 of the Sri Lankan Penal Code, which criminalizes sodomy and provides for a sentence of up to 10 years in prison. While the Penal Code of the Maldives is based on Islamic Sharia law, it too criminalizes homosexuality and prescribes harsh criminal penalties for same-sex sexual conduct and relationships. Currently, perhaps the harshest punishment for LGBTQ individuals is in Taliban-ruled Afghanistan, where same-sex relations are punishable by death. Now, in such an atmosphere of widespread institutionalized and societal homophobia across South Asian countries, representations of queer lives as well as that of LGBTQ pride take on added urgency and import. Queer individuals or groups in this region not only have to battle the threat of potential legal action and police harassment, but they also have to navigate social, cultural, and religious roadblocks to their free existence and expression. Part of the struggle constitutes challenging the commonly held perception that South Asian societies were intrinsically heterosexual and that alternative sexualities are a recently relative polluting import from the decadent West, as it were. Such sentiments are often in evidence in the form of public outcries against literary or filmic depictions that challenge heteronormative national fantasies. We saw this, for example, during the 1942 Lahore court obscenity trial for Ishmat Chughai's short story Lihaf, or during the violent protests across India in November 1998 against Deepa Mehta's controversial film Fire. In both these cases, separated by more than 50 years, the depiction of lesbianism, which is supposedly against Indian culture, was the bone of contention. However, scholarship by Ruth Vanita, Salim Kidwai, and Geeti Thadani, among others, has challenged this homogeneous, limited view of an imagined traditional or supposedly traditional heterosexual past when it comes to diverse South Asian societies. Vanita and Kidwai's groundbreaking co-edited anthology, Same-Sex Love in India, Readings from Literature and History, presents homoerotic desire and mentions of same-sex behaviors in ancient, medieval, and modern literature and translation from the Indian subcontinent. In other words, representations of same-sex desires in multifarious forms, as understood separately from the Western development of the idea of the homosexual in the 19th century as theorized by Foucault. So representations of same-sex desires in South Asia has existed in South Asian cultures for centuries. Arguably, the current homophobia is more a lasting legacy of British colonial bigotry, subsequently encoded into law and fanned by the flames of various conservative religious groups and political parties, among others. As Linda Garber argues while analyzing Asian representations of same-sex love, and this is me quoting Linda Garber, it was proscriptions and prescriptions against homosexuality, not homosexuality itself, that were imported into culturally and historically different situations after the celebrated invention of the notion in Europe in or around 1870, end quote. It is in this challenge to what Garber terms Foucauldian orthodoxy that we must locate literary representations of queer sexuality in South Asia. Unfortunately, despite dire need, literary or media representations of LGBT issues in or from South Asian countries, especially in texts aimed for younger audiences, are few and far between. In Bharat Mehta and Chris Barrett's 2021 book chapter entitled Out of the Closet, Exploring the Infoscape of LGBTQ plus fiction for and about youth in India, the authors call the available selection of text, and this is a quote from the article, dismally limited. So limited, in fact, that they needed to broaden their search criteria from LGBTQ text for or about youth just in India. They needed to broaden that to include any youth fiction or non-fiction texts featuring queer diasporic Indians and South Asians in general, no matter how tenuous the connection, because there simply were not enough texts available to be found. Despite broadening the initial search criteria, by the end of their research period in January 2019, they found only a handful. And when I say a handful, I mean less than 10 published text featuring queer Desi characters. And this is worldwide, mind you. That's pretty pathetic. Unfortunately, this publishing situation hasn't really changed too much when it comes to text published in South Asian countries in the interim 5 years since Mehta and Bharat undertook their research. So far I was talking about why it's difficult to find queer texts aimed at Desi youths or featuring Desi youths within South Asian countries that originate from South Asian countries. Now I'm going to talk about why we have trouble finding them even within the diaspora. So now when we turn our attention to the case of Western countries with more progressive LGBTQ rights, it turns out that a very different set of socio-cultural forces ultimately has a similar result. That is a significant unavailability of queer Desi youth literature. So in the US and Canada, for example, we find a significantly whitewashed youth publishing industry where texts featuring diverse characters or settings are few and far between. I'm going to turn your attention to the next slide. Hang on. Okay, this slide. If everyone can see this, these are two slides, two infographics brought out by the Cooperative Children's Book Center at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. They track sort of like diversity metrics across children's book publishing, and they've been doing it since the 80s. These are two snapshots of the metrics that they found in children's books in 2015, published in 2015, and children's book published in the United States in 2018. Okay. And here, although they track diversity metrics across multiple things, like, so for instance, they will look at how many children's books feature non-minority religions, how many of them feature disabled characters, how many of them feature Black characters, how many of them feature, different nationalities, so on and so forth. These infographics kind of concentrate on the racial distribution just to show how whitewashed children's literature publishing in the United States really is. So in 2015, if we look at it, 73.3% of all children's books published in the United States for that year featured white characters. 12.5% featured animals and trucks. African American or Africans featured only in 7.6% of the books published that year. For Asian and Asian Pacific Americans, it was 3.3%. For Latinx people, it was 2.4%. And for Native Americans or First Nations people, it came in at less than 1%. These infographics kind of went a long way towards raising the awareness that there is this massive problem in publishing, in scholarship, in the kind of books that children here get to read, that it is very whitewashed, it doesn't feature enough minorities, and so on. We see that the metrics have improved a little bit in 2018, and this was after the establishment of organizations like We Need Diverse Books, which started as a Twitter hashtag, became a national nonprofit, and so on and so forth, and a real push in publishing companies to increase the diversity of the content. We see that in 2018, the numbers change a little bit. It goes up slightly. So for instance, the percentage of Asian Pacifics or Asian Pacific American representation doubles. But even with the percentage doubling, it goes only from 3.3% to 7%. Or for African Americans, it kind of goes from 7.6% to 10%. So there is an increase, but it is marginal compared to the overall share. Representation of white characters do go down. It goes down from 73.3% to 50%. However, you'll notice that the non-human representation, animals, trucks, things like that, Thomas the Tank Engine, characters like that, that more than doubles. It goes up from 12.5% to 27%. And a lot of scholars have sort of argued that this is because publishers, when they were faced with the backlash of, oh, your publishing list is full of too many white characters, they defaulted to publishing something less controversial. So if you publish, Winnie the Pooh, people don't come at you and say, oh, you're not giving enough diverse representation. So instead of concentrating on humans, they kind of shifted to more to non-human subjects. Anyway, but this is just to say that the youth publishing industry in US and Canada is extremely whitewashed. YA texts featuring Desi protagonists follow a similar trend. There are not a whole lot of YA texts that have, protagonists of color, including South Asian or Desi protagonists. So queer young adult publishing is also a specific niche that has only picked up pace and begun thriving in the 21st century. So only in the last 2.5 decades. While the first queer YA books primarily featuring white characters were published in the late 60s, the subsequent decades saw a mere trickle of such publications, which increased slowly in number as well as in quality of representation. So this next slide features these two books, very, very valuable towards the study of queer YA literature in general, by Michael Cart and Christina Jenkins. The first book came out in 2006, and then the updated version with much more recent data came out in 2018. So these are pioneering work where they identify, categorize, and compile lists of LGBTQ youth literature since 1969. Cart and Jenkins also point out specific trends, such as the early negative and traumatic portrayals of gay kids and the later emphasis on queer acceptance and joy. In the recent book-length study of LGBTQ adolescent literature since 2010, which is the second book that came out in 2018, Cart and Jenkins point out that notable changes include, and I'm quoting here, the increasing appearance of people of color in a literature that historically has been almost exclusively white and middle class, though characters of color are still underrepresented. Now, Cart and Jenkins' examples of recent diverse LGBT adolescent literature feature novels with queer Asian American protagonists. Tellingly, however, those comprise primarily East Asian American characters. So Japanese American, Korean American, Chinese American, with a marked absence of South or Southeast Asian representation. Rajni Shrikant and Lavina Shankar have pointed out that while Asian American studies has made important strides in representation in K-12 and higher education, the field continues to center East Asian American stories and experiences, and not South or Southeast Asian ones. Unfortunately, this lopsided representational trend is largely true in Asian American youth literature as well. So when we consider that the texts that I'm discussing today exist at the perfect intersection of these multiple marginalized identities. So, not just queer, but also South Asian. We begin to see why queer Desi YA literature is a nascent category, even in Western countries, with more progressive LGBT rights, let alone in South Asian nations, which are extremely homophobic and have horrible laws against LGBT people. So as you can see, even in case of Desi diaspora authors, okay, so I have 2 more slides. I mean, so far I talked about why you can't find Desi queer literature, both in the diaspora and here. But the good news is that over the last 10 years, the situation has changed somewhat. The situation in South Asia is still pretty not great. There aren't a lot of books being published out of South Asian countries for the reasons that I've outlined. However, in the diaspora, in the last 10 years, and especially in the last 5 years, there has been a huge influx of books, YA books that are coming out. This is very new, very exciting. And part of the reason why I'm sort of charting this research project is to see how this field grows, because it's super new. As you can see, I've listed some of the queer Desi YA books that have come out, a few earlier ones, especially the ones that have won awards. The ones that are in green, those are the ones that are published within South Asia. And the ones that are all in black, those are the ones that are published in the diaspora. But I kind of tried to list them according to Europe publications, so you guys can begin to see that initially there were only very few and far between. books being published. And then about 2014 is when the tide turns and we start getting more books that are being published with queer Desi protagonists or featuring queer Desi stories, queer Desi YA stories, sorry. And then when we go to the next slide, we really, like I said, last 5 years, the floodgates have kind of opened a little bit, not all the way through, but we have far more choices if we look at publications within the last 5 years. So the situation has improved a little bit, but again, you will notice that every entry here is marked in black, which means we don't see queer Desi publications for young people, children or adolescents coming out of South Asian countries. These are all published in the diaspora. So, there's some hope, but again, if you look at the overall picture, it's still fairly bleak. So this publication trend of YA texts that portray queer Desi protagonists has been a welcome and necessary development over the last decade, especially the flurry of novels like the ones in this slide, published in the last few years. Moreover, these Desi YA texts centering queer relationships fill the representative lacuna. Nitya Shivashankar and Tarini Vishwanath have noted when they say, and this is me quoting from the article, there are hardly any examples of non-heteronormative romances in the Indian American context, especially those featuring female protagonists. End quote. While Shivashankar and Vishwanath are specifically commenting on Indian American texts, their observations ring broadly true across the entire Desi young adult literature corpus. So now it is crucial to examine how these pioneering texts operate. I'm hoping that by sharing this list of books, that those of you that are interested in maybe reading up more on this can begin to compile a list and refer to them, for your own. And I'm also happy to provide these lists if anybody gets in touch with me or emails me or something. Okay, so now it is crucial to examine how these pioneering texts, and I am going to call them pioneering because these, like I said, this publication trend is super new. How do they operate? As some of the first literary representations of historically underrepresented and multiple marginalized Desi youth demographics around the world, these YA novels hold considerable significance. The texts pay attention to regional specificity, even as they interrogate how diasporic South Asians have been socially positioned at the intersections of race, class, ethnicity, and religion, and combat the essentialized constructs of Desi immigrant identities within queer YA literature. My analysis of these recent adolescent literary works disrupts the overwhelming whiteness of queer YA literature criticism. I also push back against the invisibilizing of Desi youth literature in English within children's literature scholarship in general. Moreover, we need to look at these works in the context of the wave of current pushbacks against queer rights, especially trans rights, globally. The progress of social justice is never linear, and we cannot take gains made in the fight for queer or indeed human rights for granted. While these texts are significant from a youth publishing trend standpoint and provide painful but necessary reflections of homophobic Desi societies and the quest for queer self-determination, they also evince growing pains aplenty, as it were. Works by authors like Sabina Khan. So Sabina Khan's works are listed. This is the fourth one entry from the top. Works by authors like Sabina Khan, Akweke Emezi, and Himanjali Shankar celebrate their protagonists' non-conformist identities. In the process, they address taboo topics, challenge claustrophobic societal mores, and rip open closets, often with tragic results. The overwhelming focus on coming out narratives, and especially on queer trauma, within these Desi texts mirrors trends in early Anglo-American queer YA literature. Daring to desire beyond heteronormative diktats is to invite punishment, as it were. The incomparable James Baldwin once said, literature is indispensable to the world. The world changes according to the way people see it, and if you alter, even by a millimeter, the way a person looks at reality, then you can change it. Now, the import of these words changes when we consider that Baldwin was a gay African-American author, and that these sentiments would be equally or especially applicable to literature written for and featuring queer youth. Critics have called YA literature one of potential, something that helps adolescents wrestle with the complex, difficult business of identity formation and figuring out their place in the world. If, following Rudin Sims Bishop's foundational idea, we consider that these texts are literary mirrors for queer Desi kids generally starve for representations, what kind of reflections do they show us? Now, Dr. Sim Bishop's ideas is that texts for younger children can provide either mirrors where they reflect back our own identities or realities at us and provide a kind of affirmation of our own identity. So mirrors are really, really important for representation purposes. They are also windows where they can provide sort of glimpses into other lives, other identities. For people, especially people that are mainstream people that are not marginalized, they can get to see, for instance, what the life of a marginalized person might be like and maybe develop some empathy. So this idea of mirrors and windows is a pretty foundational one in children's lit criticism, and I'm kind of using it here. So if these texts do provide literary mirrors for queer Desi kids, generally start for representation, what kind of reflections do they show us? In the 2018 survey of queer YA literature, Cart and Jenkins propose a model delineating the 3 types of stories with gay or lesbian characters published for young adult audience from 1969 to 2016. So the 3 general types of stories that they identify, the first one is homosexual visibility, the second one is gay assimilation, and the third one is queer consciousness or community. So a number of these queer Desi texts under discussion fall into the first category, that is homosexual visibility. These stories tend to focus on coming out narratives, whether voluntary or forcibly outed. The dramatic tension arises from the previously invisible, unexpectedly made visible, posing a disruption to entrenched social norms. Cart and Jenkins specify that most of the early LGBTY novels published in the 1970s and 1980s lean heavily into this type, a shock to the collective system of cis heteronormativity. It is perhaps not surprising that even decades later, some of the first few examples of queer Desi adolescent literature also follow this established pattern. After all, breaking through a particularly Desi brand of often violent homophobia is no joke. It poses a shock to the collective system, as it were, and often accrues collateral damage. So Himanjali Sarkar's Talking of Muskan, which was published in 2014 by Duckbill, and so published in India, is one of the only queer texts published in India so far. This coming out narrative set in an Indian high school has this classic trifecta: the closeted lesbian, classist and homophobic bullying, and finally, a suicide attempt. The traumatic coming out narrative places this YA novel squarely in the category of homosexual visibility that Cart and Jenkins propose. This novel was a pioneer within Indian youth literature in terms of even addressing the taboo topic of homosexuality. Shayani Basu, the publisher of Duckbill at the time, points out the real need for stories such as this in a culture that largely pretends that gay kids do not exist. Basu says, and I'm quoting Basu here, there are kids who are aware of their sexual orientation early on and who have difficulty fitting into conventional notions of gender behavior. For this handful, it is important to know that there are other kids facing the same dilemma. So in other words, she's saying that Desi kids, especially in India, need mirrors. So it lets them know that other people like them also exist and that it's not a crime or it's not unnatural, it's not something wrong, to be queer, to be gay, to be a lesbian, whatever. This is indeed a laudable sentiment, and as one of the only Indian YA publications even acknowledging that queer teens exist, it's an important one as well. However, the focus on suicide and the implication that queerness, or the realization or revelation thereof, needs must coincide with trauma with a capital T, as it were, unfortunately burdens Talking of Muskan with an outdated and reductive treatment of the subject. Talking of Muskan falls smack dab into a much critiqued pattern in the first wave of Anglo-American LGBT publishing, which focused disproportionately on homosexuality as a deviant, unnatural mental disorder, and hence led to the infamous Bury Our Gays stereotype, where basically you would have gay characters, but by the end they would all die, or a bunch of them would die. You couldn't have happy endings. Extremely problematic also is that readers never hear directly from Muskan herself. Instead, the novel is narrated by 3 of Muskan's classmates, Alia, Shubhoja, and Pratik, as they recount the events of the past 5 months that led to the unsuccessful, thankfully, suicide attempt for Muskan. So in other words, instead of the closeted lesbian character, readers hear from her straight friends' perceptions of the events surrounding her coming out. I would argue that this narrative strategy seeks to soft launch the queer narrative and make it more palatable for straight readers by prioritizing heterosexual viewpoints instead. It occurs to me that Ek Ladki Ko Dekha To Acha Laga, which was the much touted first Bollywood lesbian story that came out in 2019, did something similar. Instead of focusing on the lesbian couple, the film instead concentrates on how the closeted lesbian protagonist attempts to come out to a conservative and traditional Punjabi family. So the ultimate message is clear: be true to yourself, but try not to rock the heteronormative boat. These two books, or this book or that film that I just mentioned, they're more concerned with how the heterosexual people around the queer person is dealing with the fact that they are queer. It's not really focusing on the queer person themselves, if that makes sense. In this version, queerness almost seems like a curse that only complicates and troubles the protagonist's lives. First-generation Canadian immigrant Sabina Khan's 2019 novel, The Love and Lives of Rukhsana Ali, is initially set in Seattle. So Sabina Khan's books are fourth from the top. But it soon moves to Bangladesh as the primary setting. This is the epitome of a problem novel, as it were, where the queer female Bangladeshi American protagonist battles issues. That is, homophobic responses from family and community. While Khan's YA novel affirms Rukhsana's queer identity and connects her with LGBTQ activists and allies in Bangladesh, it is also chock full of queer trauma. So now there are many reasons why Sabina Khan's debut novel stands out among the queer Desi YA novels published recently. Rukhsana Ali, for example, is not only a queer lesbian, but also Muslim in an Islamophobic political climate, Bangladeshi American, where narratives of Hindu, Punjabi, and North Indian Americans abound, and dark-skinned in a culture that prizes fair skin. Furthermore, certain intersectional identities, such as queer and Muslim, are deemed incompatible or rendered invisible by both queer and Muslim spaces. In an interview with Scholastic, Sabina Khan declares that she started writing because she couldn't find stories that had characters that looked like her daughters and many of her students. Her daughter had recently come out as bisexual. Khan also admits that her interest in LGBTQ issues and advocacy was spurred by her desire to support her younger daughter, who came out as bisexual when she was 17. This point about Khan writing her novel, not from the perspective of lived experience, but from the position of an LGBTQ ally, preaching the importance of learning about and accepting sexual minorities is important, because it perhaps explains in part why her debut novel is one we would classify as a classic problem novel, revolving around a traumatic coming out narrative, where Rukhsana Ali, she's a Bangladeshi American high school senior in Seattle. She's secured her identity as a lesbian, but is very much in the closet, fearing backlash from her conservative Muslim parents. Her worst fears come true when her parents catch her kissing her secret American girlfriend and immediately ship her off from Seattle to Bangladesh under false pretenses of visiting her sick grandmother. Once in Dhaka, they try to forcibly marry off Rukhsana entirely against her wishes. So what makes this whole situation infinitely worse is that Rukhsana is in her final semester of high school, and her parents' homophobic machinations have put her high school graduation and future plans of joining Caltech on a scholarship at risk. So in other words, this plot is chock full of issues with a capital I that Rukhsana must face, address, and conquer, educating her ignorant. Hi, sorry. Sorry, was somebody trying to speak here? Okay. All right. I thought somebody was trying to say something. I'm going to go back to what I was saying. All right. So in other words, the plot for Rukhsana Ali is chock full of issues with capital I. And while doing so, she has to educate her ignorant, abusive, homophobic family and community members along the way. The novel does feature a few allies and supportive queer-friendly Bangladeshi characters. Her grandmother and her cousin Shoila, especially, as well as a few of Rukhsana's fiancé Sohail's comrades who feature in one scene. But the overall impression is one of relentless angst and trauma. Reading this novel in the 2020s involves a strange feeling of deja vu. We see here an example of a diasporic South Asian author entering the YA LGBTQ literary landscape well after her mainstream white counterparts, and who ends up replicating the reductionist, trauma-based model of earlier queer YA lit that focused mostly on distressing coming out narratives with a heavy dose of implicit, albeit well-intentioned preaching, moralistic or otherwise. In purposefully attempting to address issues faced by Desi LGBTQ youth, Khan's novel moves into what we may classify as LGBTQ trauma porn, although with distinctly Desi beats. The Love and Lives of Rukhsana Ali has it all. The threat of losing her educational opportunities, being essentially kidnapped by her homophobic parents, locked up, emotionally blackmailed, dealing with the dreaded South Asian matchmaking aunties and the associated classism, colorism, and other ills, not to mention almost forced into a heterosexual arranged marriage in a different continent. Our heroine has to literally plot and successfully execute an escape plan back to the US to avoid her fate of forced marriage. Apart from Rukhsana's own trials and tribulations, the novel also features a distressing murder of a gay character. Sohail, the groom Rukhsana's parents were trying to pawn her off on, turns out to be closeted and gay himself. Under the guise of marrying her, he was helping Rukhsana escape to the US instead. In a shocking plot twist, Sohail is murdered violently by a group of homophobic Bangladeshi men. The inspiration for this plot point was based on real events, as Khan's acknowledgement section lays out. Finally, I would like to take this opportunity, and I'm quoting Khan here. I would like to take this opportunity to honor all of the LGBTQ Muslims who have lost their lives far too soon, victims of senseless hate, prejudice, and violence. In particular, Shulhaz Manan, co-founder of Rupban, Bangladesh's first and only LGBT magazine, and K. Mahabub Rabbi or Tonoy, both community leaders and LGBTQ activists, whose brutal murders in 2016 called attention to the very real dangers that Muslim LGBTQ community face every day. So this is from the acknowledgement section of Rukhsana Ali. Of course, one may consider this a touching tribute. However, I would argue that Sohail's distressing murder is used merely as a sensationalist plot point that ultimately aids the character development and transformation of Rukhsana's homophobic parents. Violently killing off a gay character off screen, as it were, to assist in the positive character development of abusive homophobes who subsequently realize the error of their ways and accept the lesbian daughter at long last, seems less like a tribute to Manan and Tonoy and more in line with bury the gays trope that I was talking about earlier. Hopefully, as more queer Desi texts are published, authors will feel freer to focus on queer joy or even queer neutrality without zoning in solely and relentlessly on queer pain, trauma, and angst. Exploring queerness primarily through the lens and trauma and exceptionalism has significant limitations, especially since these are some of the early defining works in this subgenre. It is especially important then to also highlight LGBTQ youth literature that focuses instead on Desi queer joy and pride. Having spoken at length about the issues with queer female representation within a diasporic as well as South Asian Bangladeshi, YA context, in case of the Love and Lives of Rukhsana Ali and talking of Muskan, I wanted to wrap up my talk by briefly recommending another diasporic Bangladeshi YA novel that does quite the opposite in representational terms. Adiba Jaigirdar is a queer Bangladeshi Irish writer whose debut novel, The Henna Wars, and I have her listed here. She's right below Sabina Khan on the slide, if you take a look. She's quite prolific. She's published 3 books in the last 4 years, and I think he's coming up with more. So Jaigirdar is a queer Bangladeshi Irish writer whose debut novel, The Henna Wars, was published in 2020. She went on to publish Honey and Issues Guide to Fake Dating in 2021 and has since published several other YA novels featuring queer Muslim characters. Honey and Issue is particularly interesting since it features a romance between 2 diasporic Bengali girls from the 2 Bengals, aka that is West Bengal in India as well as Bangladesh. Jaigirdar too provides a kind of granular specificity in her character designs that explores hyper-local Bengali cultures. For instance, her novel draws attention to the kinds of cultural similarities and differences that exist within diasporic Indian Bengali and diasporic Bangladeshi Bengali cultural contexts. So in other words, she's not taking Indian Bengali diasporas and Bangladeshi Bengali diasporas and pretending that both are the same, because they are not. In contrast, Humaira or Hani Khan is Muslim, bisexual, out to her supportive parents and of Bangladeshi Bengali descent. In contrast, Ishita Ishude is an atheist of Hindu cultural background, closeted and of Indian Bengali descent. Unlike Sabina Khan, Jaigirdar uses a light, breezy touch which rarely descends into heavy-handed stereotypes, with readers getting access to both protagonists' point of view in alternate chapters. Honey and Issues Guide to Fake Dating uses classic romance tropes such as fake dating and Grumpy versus Sunshine, while also deftly navigating nuanced storylines featuring queer Muslims, biphobia, homophobia, issues with cultural assimilation in Ireland, and so on. I posit that authors such as Adiba Jaigirdar, Vivek Shraya, and Naomi Kanakia uncouple queer desire and seemingly inevitable punishment, whether legally or societally imposed. In doing so, they encourage their young readers to look beyond the prevailing stereotype of the angsty, traumatized homosexual who is forever the outsider in Desi communities or otherwise. Arguably, this is an aspirational move of sorts. It strikes back against the tired representational trope of queerness as deviant and unnatural and invites young readers to conceive of queerness in celebratory terms instead. Even as they partake in classic tropes and themes commonly associated with YA literature in general, these texts reject essentialist portrayals and open up possibilities for the manifold shapes, forms, and dimensions that queerness may take. Perhaps more radically, these Desi YA authors normalize queerness within Desi spaces and provide models for what living true to one's authentic self in all its facets may look like. They take a stand against the homophobia baked into South Asian communities, diasporic or otherwise, via the representations of messy, complex, gloriously imperfect LGBTQ teen characters living regular lives. These texts are radical precisely because they cement queerness as mundane, commonplace, and entirely normal, simply another facet of what it means to be human. And I hope that overall, the publishing trends that we've been seeing over the last 10 years, and especially over the last 5 years, tend to move in this positive direction rather than sticking with the queer trauma line. Thank you. That's all I have for you today.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you very much, ma'am, for your wonderful presentation. Right from the children literature to Bangladeshi literature, we had an in-depth analysis, understanding, and it was a thought-provoking session.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Paushali, ma'am. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. I was very honored.
It was really a great time for listening. It's extremely, we have learned a lot. We have getting to know what we are actually in lot of nearby to LGBTQ. It's very good. Thank you so much for joining us, ma'am. Thanks for considering us.
Of course.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks. I'm trying to read some of the comments. I think people have questions.
Yes, shall I read out the questions?
Or, yeah, I'm reading them. Like, do we take questions now or what is in the program?
We shall have it now, ma'am.
Okay. I was reading something that Shujita K wrote or SK wrote. How do you think portrayal of LGBTQ characters in YA literature influences societal perceptions and legal progress regarding LGBTQ rights in South Asia? I mean, the hope is that it does. Well, I would say the first hope is that, young kids can actually see themselves represented, learn there's nothing wrong, nothing abnormal, unnatural about not being straight. Or that straight Desi kids learn that, well, LGBT Desi kids exist and there's nothing wrong with that either, So it either builds empathy if you are straight or it helps you see yourself if you are not. But when it comes to influencing societal perception and legal progress in South Asia, I think that's quite far yet, because as you saw from the list that I had shared, most of the books that are coming out in the last 5 years, most of the ones that are coming out in the last 10 years are coming out in the diaspora. I'm not even sure how much of it is even available for purchase in India. You would have to have them shipped from overseas. And you would have to really hunt down to find out these texts. Part of the reason why I made this list was I was hoping to make it maybe easier for people who are interested in this to find books that they want to read. But these books are not readily available in India or other South Asian nations. They really aren't. I think I highlighted maybe 5 texts here that were published within South Asia. And most of the ones that are published within South Asia are either published in India, Sri Lanka, or Bangladesh. We don't really have representations of queer Desi literature from other countries, especially ones where the penalties, where homosexuality is still illegal and where the legal penalties are really bad. So I want to say that these books will bring about great societal change, but I don't think we are there yet, especially because availability is a major, major issue. I hope that answers your question, Sujita. I'm looking at the next question. Prashad Kumar, considering the contrasting legal status of LGBTQ rights in South Asia and the emerging body of queer Desi young adult literature, how do you perceive the role of these literary works in addressing cultural stigmas and advocating for social and legal reforms within the region? I think my previous answer kind of also responded to this also. I think that these books could actually be very, very important in raising awareness. But for that, they need to be available within South Asian countries first. If they're all by publishers based in the West and they cost a lot and they are not easily acquired, you have to literally go on their websites, hunt them down, and then order them internationally and so on and so forth. Lack of access is a problem. Now, if Indian schools or libraries or college libraries begin stocking these, then maybe students would have greater access. Books that are published by Duckbill, yes, you can get those in India. But like I said, the Duckbill book with Muskan, it is representation, but it is problematic, very, very much so. Especially the positive kinds of portrayals that I was talking about, you don't have a whole lot of that yet. And to make any kind of appreciable difference in addressing cultural stigmas, or even more important, advocating for social and legal reforms within the region, there has to be greater, I guess, greater circulation of these texts within South Asian countries, which I think is very important, but which is absolutely not happening yet. So one of the things I have been doing as part of my broader research project is compiling a list of these books that feature Desi queer characters and that are aimed towards either children or young adult folks, young adult audiences. And most of them are kind of geared towards young adult audiences because I think most Desi authors that I have seen don't really write books for much younger children because the subject is considered very controversial. So for teens, it's controversial, but still something that you can address. But for younger kids, there's barely anything. But one of the things I am doing, because getting out these books, like letting people know that they exist, that they are beginning to be published in the last 10 years, especially so in the last 5 years, I think that is very important. And so part of what I'm doing as the broader, project is compiling a bibliography, which I hope to publish soon online. And, you know, I would appreciate it if people like you would help get the word out and maybe share the bibliography and so on, so that more people are aware that these books exist. Because unless people are aware and unless they're actually buying them and distributing them, how are you going to change hearts and minds, much less the legal situation in South Asia? Nepal is very promising though, because in the last year, they've begun steps towards legalizing same-sex marriage. Um, they have a provisional judgment, but the Supreme Court hasn't ruled on it yet. I'm hoping that within the next few years, we will see in Nepal the Supreme Court actually accepting same-sex marriage as a completely legal entity with all the same rights and representations that opposite-sex marriage gets. And maybe that can start the conversational ball rolling. I'm hoping to see more progress in India. There are so many LGBTQ organizations, NAS Foundation and others that are fighting tireless fights. But it is a very difficult fight, as I think all of us know. Yeah, I can share the titles. You guys can maybe take screenshots or something. That might be the easiest way to do it. So I have 2 slides here. This is one slide. If any of y'all are interested, please take like a screenshot or something. So these are the more recent books that came out from 2020 till now. I'm going to wait like a couple seconds so people can maybe take a picture or a screenshot or something. And the earlier list is here. The ones that are in green are the ones that are published within South Asia. So Sham Selvadurai, Swimming in the Monsoon Sea, which won the Lambda Literary Award, that was published from Sri Lanka, for instance. So if you're interested, please take a screenshot of this also. And also, if anybody else is interested, I have a slightly longer list of works, and not just fiction, but also memoirs, some poetry, that I'm happy to share if anybody emails and reaches out. My email is available publicly. It's poshari.bhaduri@mtsv.edu. And I think seminar organizers will also be able to help you with that. So if anybody emails me, I'm very happy to share a longer bibliography that I'm still in the process of compiling. And most of these are from the last 10 years, mostly from the last 7 years, because that's when we see the greatest number of books suddenly starting to be published. Okay. I am going to look at the chat again. All right, if people have done this, I'm gonna stop sharing. I don't want to hog the screen. Okay. Yeah, no, not a problem, Arati. Happy to help. If there are any other questions, I'm happy to take those on also. I think I answered both the questions that I see here. And thanks to you both for those questions. They were really great. I guess I have a question in my turn. Has anybody that is in the audience ever read a queer Desi YA book, or any kind of, I mean, it doesn't even have to be YA, any kind of book published about Desi characters or written by a Desi author that features queer characters? There's not a whole lot out there, which is why I'm asking. I'm curious what any of you might have been exposed to, or what you might have encountered. And I would be very, very happy to hear from anybody that has actually, found some of these books out in the wild or in bookshops, or, online book websites and things like that. Nobody? That unfortunate, but not surprising. Like I said, you have to actually go hunting to find most of these texts. They're not, you have to actually dedicatedly go out and try to look. Are there any other questions? I'm happy to answer anything about the research or about any of the stuff that I talked about today.
We have certain books, ma'am. We have for the past few years only, we are able to get a lot of writers in LGBTQ, like David Patnaik and us. And now it's an upcoming topic here in India. People, they have started to talk about LGBTQ,
Yes.
and they have started to write about queer and all. And the gay writing and gay acceptance and lesbian, it has been started now. But most research, they have not done before, but now for the past 10 to 15 years, we have many PhD research scholars, they have submitted, they have started their research work in queer writing.
Oh, that's amazing.
Especially, yes, especially writers in India, they have started, like Playboy, that work and all, it has expressed the queer thing, even Global Blue, that and all, it
Yeah.
has expressed the view and all. I hope more and more people will be doing the further, they will be doing, lots of work will come up in upcoming years, I hope, from India also.
Yeah, I hope so too. Of course, like the people that I was citing, Salim Kidwai, Ruth Vanita, they are also Indian or Pakistani scholars. So there have been scholars, but it's really encouraging to see more people sort of taking it on, and this becoming like more of a subject of study. Um, like I said, I'm keeping an eye out on the field. So not just on the primary text, which is what I generally talked about, but also the scholarship that is coming out. So Tarini Vishwanath, whom I cited in my paper, I she has just recently written a fantastic article on Vivek Shaya. So
yeah, even our evening valedictory function, Meena Kandasamy, who is going to join, she has written a lot regarding that. Yeah, she has spoken a lot regarding the literature, and she has.
Oh, I'm a big fan of Dr. Kandasamy. Yeah.
Yeah, she is an university student. She has done a lot in it, and she has that empowerment to talk in bravely towards it. Now it has become an open topic to all to talk and discuss. I hope it gives a better way to do research on it.
I hope so too. I think the fact that in 2018, Article 377 was finally actually, struck down by the Supreme Court, I think that helped. Or even stories or even OTT stories like Made in Heaven, which is that movie, not movie, what is it? Is that Amazon Prime series about like
Yes,
wedding,
modern.
manners or whatever? But
Yes.
one of the main characters is a closeted gay man, and I think especially in the first season of Made in Heaven, there's a very touching portrayal and very, very heartbreaking portrayal um, of the protagonist when he was a boy and closeted and and so on. So like I'm beginning to see more these kind of stories even start coming out in the mainstream, which is encouraging. And honestly, I don't think it could have happened without the Supreme Court, striking down 377. Because when you think that, oh, if I publish a story, I might go to jail, that's a deterrent. So yeah, we can only hope that this increases. Like I said, this is very new and I'm just begun to track it, but I think it's exciting and I'm hopeful.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for joining. Over to Vilashri, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you once again for your wonderful presentation and the deep discussion you had with us today. And I hope we shall connect in future too. Thank you so
No,
much,
of
ma'am.
course.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. This was an honor.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And
Thank you so much, ma'am.
And now the participants, let's break for lunch and we shall join for 1 o'clock sharp for the paper presentation session. And the participants are requested to find the proper rooms with the given links that is provided in the WhatsApp group. So, and also I request the participants to join for the valedictory function also. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
I repeat, the participants are requested to come back at 1 o'clock after the lunch. And you're asked to kindly mute the voice. You can find your respective rooms in the given link and you can start the presentation. Thank you.
We request the participants to join after completion of your paper presentation. And yesterday, those who have presented the paper, all the participants, we request you all to join to Meena Kandasamy's ma'am talk today evening by 3 o'clock. The valedictory function will be followed. Thank you all. Thanks for joining. Thank you, Vilashri.
Thank you all.